Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from India to all participants of the World University Summit from different time zones. My name is Professor Y.S.R. Murthy. I'm the founding Vice Chancellor of RV University, Bangalore. I wish to extend a warm welcome to all the distinguished panelists as well as participants of the 24th thematic session on Beyond Brick and Mortar, Quality Assurance, Accreditation, and Benchmarking. I wish to congratulate the OP Jindal Global University and its dynamic Vice Chancellor, Dr. C. Rajkumar, and his entire team for organizing this Mega World University Summit. The sheer scale of this event is mind-boggling. We have a distinguished panel with us today. I am pleased to introduce Mr. Phil Baty, Editorial Director, Global Rankings, Times Higher Education, UK, Professor Dr. Romy Lawson, Provost, Murdoch University, Australia, Professor Dr. Kripa Shanker, Deputy Director, Indian Institute of Technology, Professor Yu, President, University Tunku, Abdul Rahman from Malaysia. We are going to join by Mr. Ben Sowter, Senior Vice President from Quacquarelli Symonds shortly. I wish to give you a few opening remarks before we open it up for panel discussion, which will be followed by Q&A at the end. The COVID pandemic has completely altered the way we learn, work, live, eat, and socialize. The pandemic has brought into sharp focus our own inadequacies, human greed, unsustainable development, misapplication of science and technology, and many such issues. The shutdown of campuses has affected students' access to libraries, laboratories, and other campus learning spaces, and has thrown up many challenges. Peer learning has been affected. All these challenges raise a number of important issues. Has learning taken place in the process of online teaching? Was it effective? Has online education improved the graduate outcomes? The world of learning is no longer the same with online learning and blended learning coming into play. This session is provocatively titled as Beyond Brick and Mortar. My own assessment is that traditional brick and mortar campuses or face-to-face learning will not go away, but the role of higher educational institutions will be substantially redefined by the new challenges in the wake of pandemic and other technological developments. We are at the cusp of that change or inflection point. It will be a kind of rebirth for the higher education sector. Quality assurance has acquired a far more importance and significance in the wake of emergency measures that were taken by academic institutions in the past 1.5 years or so. Unlike quantity that is easily measurable, quality is very difficult to assess. What new areas should be subjected to quality assurance standards and mechanisms? How about quality of online conferences, webinars, or nature of support provided to fresh graduates in placement, or augmenting the information technology hardware or software for smooth conduct of online classes, the quality of administrative support systems for students, These examples can be multiplied further. The future of education will significantly change. We need to reimagine education and transform the future of universities. We need to revisit and reimagine quality assurance, accreditation, and benchmarking. In this context, the panel will deliberate the need for accreditation organizations, ranking agencies, quality assurance agencies, and universities to develop adaptive frameworks relevant in a post-pandemic world. We have very distinguished panel to discuss these and other very important issues. My first question is directed to Professor Yu from the University Tunku Abdul Rahman. During current COVID pandemic, universities have moved to online learning. During this process, has the definition and perception of quality of education changed? How has it evolved? Over to Professor Yu.
Thank you to Professor Murthy. I think this is a very interesting question. When we actually move everything online, of course, one critical question that we like to ask is actually, what about the quality of the educations that the students are going to get? And how do we ensure the learning outcome of the students? So, of course, various government, their accreditations agency, they have their own requirement. And some of them have also adjusted that one during this COVID pandemic era or period. Then at the same time, also professional body have also their own requirement, especially those that require the student to have hands-on and all that. So in this case, what we are trying to do is actually most universities would like to see how some of this learning outcome, okay, can be achieved still through this online teaching learning, and at the same time providing some adaptations of, for example, those physical or these laboratory-based experiment that can be actually converted to simulation, a virtual experiment that still provide the student that kind of experience. But of course, when you talk about real hands-on experience, so some actually universities that we know of actually will also take this opportunity when there's actually possibility to provide some remedial classes, which can be actually offered beyond the normal trimester or semester, but providing these remedial classes to the students, so at least they have the chances to experience themselves on these lab experiments, which are critical. Of course, some of them can be converted into virtual simulator. So when we talk about this, I think it is very important to understand that this kind of learning outcome and how they can actually later when they go out and join the society to meet the requirement of the employers. Okay, and the other thing that I'd like to mention beyond just normal, formal curriculum requirement in terms of the quality of education. And during this time, we also know that we need to train our students to have these two important criteria. One is actually they must have this growth mindset. How to continue to actually train them to have this growth mindset that they are willing to do self-learning, learn on their own, and also, of course, guided by the professors, and also willing to face the challenges and overcome all those challenges. Okay, this is, I think, one critical criterion as well. And the other thing is actually knowing about situation of COVID and all that, how we can help the student at this time to think about themselves and their relationship with the society, and how can develop their empathy, okay, so that they understand each other, because even in the era of AI, this kind of empathy is also very important. So I think that is a very unique time period for us to think about education. So beyond the normal quality of the assurance that we want for our academic programs, during this time, we should also think about something beyond the formal one, but those may be more related to life education, about having them, training them themselves up so that they have the growth mindset and empathy. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Yu, for highlighting very, very important aspects, including self-awareness on the part of the students and their relation to society, and particularly inculcation of values like empathy and also learning on their own. My next question is directed to Professor Romy Lawson from Murdoch University. What measures and pedagogical innovations have been adopted by Murdoch University or other universities in Australia to maintain quality of online education during pandemic period, given the short time in which the transition was required? Over to you, Professor Romy.
Thank you very much. I think if we try and boil things down into a very simplistic nutshell about what a quality assurance is in terms of the student experience, it is about their experience, how we've been able to design the learning, what kind of learning outcomes are there, and what kind of assessment. It's how we support those students in their learning. It's helping them progress and making sure that we're supporting them to success. And then it's also making sure that if we are going to award, then it's at the right level and the right appropriate benchmarking that goes on. So I think whenever we were thinking about how we make sure we manage to achieve those things, the thing that was always in our minds when we were thinking about, oh, what does it need to look like, was saying it has to have the student first. That was so important. The student was experiencing all sorts of things during these last 12, 18 months. So how do we put the student first? What are their needs throughout this experience? So first of all, when we think about the learning experience, we needed to make sure that we were working very collaboratively with professional bodies to ensure that we were still able to meet accreditation requirements where people were going into more vocational courses. It was no use us continuing on hoping that that was going to meet requirements if professional bodies or the external compliance bodies were saying, no, we're not going to accept that. So it was about having that ongoing conversation. And then it was also, I think, for the experience of trying to keep it authentic, of not just making it as, okay, we'll just put lots of content online and hope the students are satisfied with that. How do we try and take all the good things that they were experienced prior and make it so that they still have those authentic learning experiences? So an example of that is we run vet medicine at Murdoch University. Students are usually spending time in the vet hospital, the vet clinic. How do we help make sure that they're still doing that? And we took technology in its simplest form. We actually ended up strapping an iPhone onto the forehead of our vets who were doing operations so that they could live stream to the students, so the students could still get that authentic feel and the students could ask questions in real time. We also, when it came to looking at what we would do with our students who are working in the health services, counselling, psychologists, nursing, we were looking at what was happening in the real world and what was authentic. And in the real world, people were having to transition to telehealth. So we were part of that, of saying, okay, well, if our students can't do a placement in a hospital, can't do a placement in a clinic, then what those clinics and hospitals are doing in real life is actually telehealth. So that's the experience that we need to be giving our students. Same in education for our students. They weren't in the classroom teaching. Teachers were teaching online. So giving our student teachers the opportunity to teach online and adapt to where the real world has gone was really important. But it needed to have that conversation with those different professional bodies to say, actually, this works for us and we're comfortable that this is how you educate and it meets our requirements. I think the next thing that we really thought about as well was that student support, because it is important that students feel fully supported, and they weren't just felt that they were going online and they didn't know where they could get that help and where they would get that support from. So we really kept focusing on how we gave people a sense of connect, connect and a sense of belonging, so they still felt that they were connected to the university. So with the university, we took the support systems that we normally had. We have a thing called My Murdoch Advice, where students can drop in and get a one-stop triage kind of service. And we quickly switched that. So we had a virtual online version. So students still knew that they could just click and still get that kind of support. The same of being able to access with the academics. But the other part of it was that sense of connect with each other, with fellow students, which was really important, so that they didn't feel as isolated. So we actually put a whole social connect program together. And we were doing online yoga, online quizzes and all sorts, so the students could still feel that they were together. And I think what was also important when they were actually doing the learning experience was that we made sure that we kept a lot of the online learning, so it was in the synchronous format, so that students were still doing group work, they were still getting to have that interaction, that class discussion, and it wasn't just all put into the asynchronous. Maybe if I just talk about one other thing, which was a big thing that needed to be addressed, it was about assessment with students. And we had big conversations about procurement. They went across the whole of Australia about, you know, should we just continue with doing these kind of exams and look at how we proctor, you know, those exams and how that looks like. We as a university decided not. We decided to use this as an opportunity for us to think differently about assessment and think about how we could do more authentic assessment. But we had to be really careful that we were keeping that academic integrity in place so that we could make sure we were meeting that quality kind of assurance things as we went along. I will throw in one extra thing. We also then thought about our future students and what that might look like for them coming through into the system, how the final year school students were being impacted. And we thought about what could that early entry look like for them to take the pressure off them while they were going through this extraordinary circumstances and missing out on chunks of their education. So we worked together across the state to think about, well, what could that look like as far as early entry, making sure we were still meeting the requirements of the admission transparency, which we need to do across Australia. So hopefully those are a few examples of the kind of things that we were doing and what we were trying to think about to make sure that we kept the quality assurance in place as we went.
Thank you, Professor Romy, for highlighting a number of pedagogical innovations, including simulation, student support, social connect, and ensure that students don't miss out on the classroom interaction and class discussions, even while we do things online. And I can't agree with you more when you say that put students first and focus on what their needs are. My next question is directed to Professor Dr. Kripa Shanker from IIT Kanpur. It is now fairly clear that online learning will not go away even after world comes to terms with the COVID. In that context, what criteria do you think will be most important to measure the quality of online learning? While engaging with students online will need robust mechanisms to ensure quality learning, it will also require creativity and pedagogical innovation. How can we ensure a balance between quality, regulations, and autonomy, both of which will be critical to defining the success of e-classrooms? Over to Dr. Kripa Shanker.
Thank you, Professor Murthy, for making me the part of this August gathering. Perhaps, you know, in this group, I'm the only one who is from India, and you have to put up with my accent, all of you. The reason is that, you know, like any part of the world, people have their own style of speaking particular language, English. I think the question that you raised, that this COVID as a pandemic, from the point of view of education, what it means, it might mean a little bit different than from the point of view of the doctors, from the point of view of the administrators, from the point of view of others. From the point of view of education, what I understand is that if the contact between the students and the teacher is reduced. Reduced means is made zero. What could be done? And of course, there is a substitute possible, which was not there earlier. When perhaps many of us were students, it was not there at that time, but now it is possible to transfer, to transmit the information over the internet, which I told you that was not there earlier, using some technological means and addressing to the student. This is how I understand the whole issue. Even if this COVID pandemic, as you said, is gone, there will be perhaps some kind of advantages of this kind of transmission of the information from one end, that means the teacher, to the students. And in my feeling, in my way of looking at the things, education is not merely the transmission of the information. If that was so, it would have been like having a library that is one way of transmitting the information, but people still have the university, people still have the institute. For what? So the overall education will require the mortar and bricks later, maybe after the pandemic is over, or while the pandemic. This issue of the contact cannot be 100% given out to the technology or to the internet and so on and so forth. The second issue is about the quality. In the present situation, when the pandemic is there, or such kind of the quality of education actually means the quality of the transmission, in my opinion, because part of the education is totally cut off, and that is the interaction between the teacher and the student, the interaction between the student and the laboratories, the instruction or the smell of the laboratory and the student. He doesn't know how the H2S gas would smell. So there are certain things which are not being imparted, and they cannot be imparted unless there is contact of the student with certain, in some physical sense. That's one. The second thing is that the quality of the transmission now is a very, the quality of the education is a very simple question, in the sense that if my delivery to the students is okay, it's fine, in the sense that the quality is okay. If there is no teacher who cannot, if the delivery is not good, the transmission is not good, the education is not good. In a situation like this, it is possible to have standard transmission way, good transmission ways, and perhaps do away with the kind of bad or the third class kind of way of the delivery. Why not to select only the best one? And the best institutes are best universities.
I think we have lost Dr. Kripa Shanker. Maybe we will take up his thing when he rejoins. Now I'll move on to the next question. My next question is directed to Mr. Phil Baty. Institutions often assess their benchmarking against the global standards of excellence by means of quantitative criteria, such as the number of research articles, faculty count, international collaborations, etc. Quality is thus dependent on sustaining quantity. In the peculiar circumstances created by this pandemic, will the criteria be broadened? What is your assessment? Over to you, Mr. Phil Baty.
Thank you very much indeed for your question, and thanks for having me. Yeah, I think from Times Higher Education's perspective, we've never really privileged quantity over quality. The World University rankings that we significantly revamped in 2010, we've always looked at quality over quantity. I think there is a problem in scientific publishing, a problem in our reward system for academic careers that does tend to privilege massive publication. There's an extraordinary number of research papers don't get read, don't get cited. Sometimes you hear figures of 90% in some fields. It varies dramatically by field. But one of the things that was interesting from Times Higher's perspective, when we look at analyzing research output, research citations, we were looking at perhaps using the median value for each university, and the median value for many universities is 0 when it comes to citation. So there's a lot of research that's not being read and not being cited. So there's a problem with academic publishing, and I think we really do need to refocus on quality, not quantity. The Times Higher Education World University rankings have 13 separate indicators covering teaching, research, knowledge transfer, international outlook, and they're all scaled for the size of institutions. So just absolute volume isn't important. We're looking at focus, mission specific, everything's normalized by field, normalized by year of publication, etc. Even when it comes to research productivity, it's scaled for the size of the institution. It's a ratio. So we're really keen to say we don't want to dictate what kind of a university is excellent. We want to be able to hold a mirror up to the university, not dictate to say, well, you need to be bigger, you need to be more comprehensive. Having said that, I do think we need to rethink more broadly what we understand as excellence in higher education. The traditional rankings, of course, suggest that the more you look like Harvard, the more prestigious you are, the better you are. And I think we have to accept in this era that diversity is a fantastic strength. Excellence comes in many, many forms. So one of the things we've seen really happening over the last, accelerated dramatically over the last 18 months of the pandemic, but was happening already, is a major refocus of universities on their social and economic impact. If you're not rich, if you don't have centuries of prestige and heritage, you're still doing an amazing job. That might be in your community, it might be in reskilling local workers, it might be in providing qualified nurses and doctors for local hospitals, it might be in tackling all sorts of issues that we can bring together under the Sustainable Development Goals. So Times Higher Education in 2019 launched the impact rankings, very different from the World University rankings, which looks at research intensive global universities. The impact rankings look at all 20,000 institutions in the world. Anyone can join, anyone can submit based on their mission to specific Sustainable Development Goals, or all of them. And the key there is that it really is a new way of understanding excellence, celebrating diversity, celebrating local and national and global impact, whether that's economic impact or social impact. So yes, I think we're obliged to rethink what excellence is, rethink and reboot the mission of universities, because I think universities themselves have come under huge pressure from populist politicians who want to denigrate free thinking. They want to limit the scope of universities to question received wisdom, to challenge authority. Universities need to reboot their relationships with societies, reassert their value. And the pandemic, I think, has given them the best opportunity ever to reassert their public good, their contribution to the world, not just through the extraordinary development of treatments, the incredible volunteering we've seen, the amazing resilience we've seen in terms of keeping the lights on and educating hundreds of thousands of students globally through a pandemic, but also, from the socioeconomic side, from the epidemiology side, the modeling, the policy advice, and the post-pandemic recovery. Universities will lead it. So in short, sorry, I'm waffling on. In short, we need better and different and more diverse metrics to recognize diverse excellence, and Times Higher Education sees that very much as part of its mission, to understand excellence in all its forms and celebrate excellence in all its forms.
Thank you, Mr. Phil Baty. It's really very heartening to hear that you have taken up impact rankings and going into the social economic impact of universities, and you are prioritizing quality over quantity is also very heartening to note. My next question is for Mr. Ben Sowter from QS. what role do national and global ranking agencies play in quality assurance and benchmarking? Have there been any innovations in assessment of institutions while taking into consideration the online format of education? In what ways has the ongoing pandemic led to the reimagination of the rankings? Over to you, Mr. Ben.
And thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. It's always a privilege to be on a panel with people who actually work inside a university, who are doing the real work. And I often pinch myself a little bit when we in our sort of rankings capacity get invited into the conversation in this context, because one of the fundamental truths that has already been illustrated, I think, in this panel is that at least global rankings and probably national rankings have very, very little role to play in quality assurance terms. Actually, the principal actor of quality assurance is the institution itself, taking responsibility for its own delivery, its own students, looking after its own stakeholders, and not waiting for an external rankings agency or a government organization to regulate what it does, but to take responsibility for its own impact and interest. And I think what Professor Ewe and Professor Lawson were both saying speaks in volumes to that, because they were talking about things that no ranking can and will and ever can evaluate, such as really putting the student first, evaluating how effectively students connect with one another, looking at how well a university fosters growth mindset and empathy, all came through, and there are no indicators in any ranking that look at any of those things. So I think we should start by being realistic. One of the things, more than anything, that I think the pandemic has done for international higher education is shine a big fat spotlight on some uncomfortable truths. One of them for us in the ranking space is that actually we haven't really been talking about teaching and learning because it's difficult. It's difficult to measure, it's difficult to evaluate. We weren't evaluating it before the pandemic, we're not evaluating it during the pandemic, and therefore the pressure to really change what we're doing in the evaluation of education, which we weren't already doing, hasn't really been there because we're still not doing it. In fact, the interesting movement to online education provides all sorts of opportunities to evaluate the quality of teaching that were never there when it was all offline. If you want to check in on a recording of a lecture, you can do that much more easily now than you could when you had to physically go to a lecture theatre somewhere. But really, that's only the very tip of the iceberg. I think if all of us are honest with ourselves and reflect on our own experience at university, what happened in the classroom was the merest slice of the overall experience. It was a rite of passage. It was where we made some of our lifelong friends. Perhaps we met our husbands and wives during our time at university. It was the first time we stood on our own 2 feet, or at least we thought we were standing on our own 2 feet. The first time perhaps we developed some independence from our parents and went away a little bit and learned how to live. Now, the reality is that during the pandemic, everybody has scurried home to their parents and has got their mum and dad doing their laundry again and cooking their meals for them again and aren't learning these fundamental life lessons of how to get on in the world. And guess what? Before the pandemic, after the pandemic, and even after we come out the other side of the pandemic, rankings are not looking at any of that stuff. We're not looking at how the university experience in the round creates a test space for young people to learn how to live in a safe space, in a safe environment. And that, I think, is a vital thing that we've lost. And we've spent a lot of time looking at what's going on in the classroom. Again, an uncomfortable truth for universities. With online education, the main thing the pandemic has taught us is what we've already been talking about for 15 years. That online education is important, that we should be better at it, that we should be offering more flexibility, that we should enable people to learn from different places at different times and in different sort of chunks of education. And what's happened is after 15 years of talking about it, how long did it take? What, 10 days for a lot of universities to put everything online? 10 days. To get over 15 years of inertia talking about something that we all thought, oh, well, it's never really going to happen. It's never really going to be important. Well, guess what? It is important. And universities have had to learn it and learn it fast. But there are a lot of questions that many universities are not really asking. And those are questions that rankings are not looking at. So whilst rankings have an important role to play, not so much in the quality assurance, but to a certain extent in the benchmarking space around how universities act, the impact they have, the research that they're doing, the number of students that they're educating, some fairly headline numbers, the responsibility of rankings to get deeply embedded in the quality assurance problem, at least directly in what they're doing, is I think, very limited. What we're going to see in terms of innovations in ranking is not a reimagination for the pandemic, but I expect a reimagination after the pandemic, when whatever is comprised in this hateful term, the new normal, right? How long have we been talking about the new normal? Normal is not something to aspire to. It's something to get away from. Jodie Foster said that, the Hollywood actress. I think she had a moment of wisdom right there. We should be looking to the new remarkable. And as the new remarkable emerges from international higher education, then rankings will have a responsibility to follow what is seen as important by the sector. And that's another key truth for every leader and every vice chancellor around the world, that it is not your job to follow what we say is important. It is our job to follow what you say is important. And for you to take control over what the future of higher education should be and what the priorities are, and for us to struggle to catch up with your innovation rather than you worrying about how to comply with our data requirements.
Thank you, Mr. Ben, for this candid and frank views on various issues. You have put the focus back on the university and its delivery to the stakeholders, and how the global ranking agencies, world rankings can impact on the benchmarkings, etc. Thank you. And my next question is directed to Professor Yu. What are some of the innovative methodologies used by universities to measure the success and quality learning? While quality assurance standards like students' feedback forms could provide crucial feedback, these have a limited impact since they are collected at the end of the term. In this context, what other mechanisms could be put in place for continuous improvement and quality assurance? Over to you, Professor Yu.
Okay, thank you. Now, I think this, as you all know, that because of this online teaching and learning, there is also a new norm, and it opens up new opportunities. So I think many universities in the world, when we actually move on to online teaching and learning, we can also see different pattern of learning from the students, and then how students actually interact with the professors. For example, using all these online tools, Zooms, Teams, and all this and all that, students can give direct feedback at the very time, very same moment that the professors is teaching and all that, and we can receive this kind of feedback continuously. And now it is so easy for us to conduct online quizzes, online questionnaires and all that, and survey to know about their response and all that. So I can see that as long as we are willing to actually have this growth mindset, willing to actually see how with the new opportunity, new devices, how we make use of this one, and then to facilitate this. For example, in the past, if we want to actually arrange for a student to have a small group discussion, you need to find a room and all that. And nowadays, with all these things, the student can easily, anytime they think that they want to have a group discussion, right away, they can organize it and they have it at that one. So that actually also has transformed how we view about what they have learned and how to assess them. For example, during this time, many UC have actually moved on to open-ended assessment. Okay, so by having this one, of course, we have to ensure that the students know how actually to answer those questions and how to actually reflect what they have learned. But sometimes I would like to think it in a different way. For example, if the students have been tested on those questions in the textbook, okay, and with known answer, we can say that they have actually acquired the knowledge and skill to answer those problems with known answers. But nowadays, with this online teaching learning, and we have to do all these open-ended questions, assignments, and all that, this is more similar to the real work nature outside, although this is online, but it's more similar. So those students who are able to solve all those problems and all that, they have to source for information, look for solutions, work with the teams, and then come up with their own analysis and evaluations and even creative ideas. So those are students who have acquired the knowledge and skill to solve the problems with unknown answers. So, but if you look at this one, it actually opens up new opportunities that we in fact prepare our students earlier than last time for the digital world, digital economy, and also for the way how they view problems. That is no longer just a fixed set of solutions, but it goes beyond that. They are willing to explore, they have to learn themselves, they have to collaborate, they are willing to source for information and decide what is the right and wrong information and come up with their own analysis and creative ideas. So I can see that this one really transform how, and as long as we can make good use of these tools and new ways of teaching, learning and assessment, even when we go back to physical classroom teaching, we should be able to continue to complement the conventional way and enhance the students' learning experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Yu, for highlighting the open-ended assessments and the new opportunities for group discussions thrown by the online education or the Zoom platform, etc. My next question is directed to Professor Romy Lawson. How should universities develop meaningful collaborations to facilitate a smooth exchange of best practices to enable growth in the global average of excellence in higher education? How can more senior and established institutions engage with younger universities or universities in developing areas to enable them with higher standards of quality and excellence? Over to you, Professor Romy.
Thank you. I think when I think about the collaborations, I think about it in perhaps a couple of different ways. I think there's within the university, across the universities, and then there's also that kind of partnership element. So perhaps if I start with the first, and I think what has happened over the last 18 months has really forced us into thinking about the balance of where competition is and where collaboration is and where we can be stronger as a sector in collaboration. There will always be some competition amongst universities. You know, that's the nature of when you're trying to compete for student numbers, student load, rankings, etc., etc. But I think that people have learned that we've actually progressed a lot more when we've collaborated in these times of unknown going forward. So a couple of examples that I can give you of collaboration, one that I think went well and one that has got room for improvement is, I talked to you earlier about the fact that we work very strongly as a sector with the professional bodies, rather than having lots of single voices of the universities going to the Nurse and Midwifery Council or going to the education councils and saying, well, what could it look like so we can still progress our students? We went together to say, let's have the conversation and let's try and find a solution so that we can help all our students be able to still meet the requirements needed for accreditation and that everyone's got that comfort level. And by having that collective voice and working together in that collaborative way, we were able to really achieve at a much better pace, a solution to be able to continue to progress our students rather than saying, sorry, you can't do what's the normal. You'll have to sit on the sideline for a while until we can get you over it. So that was an interesting one of working together. But also what I think we got from that was by having that collaboration with the professional bodies, we were actually helping them develop their practice. They were also in a point of wondering about how, you know, I talked about telehealth, online teaching in schools, you know, was going to have to progress and adapt. And by having the universities working with them to say, so this is what it could look like in a placement format, it actually helped progress them in their thinking about what they needed to do within their professions. So that was good. And an example of one where there's room for improvement, I mentioned earlier that we went into an early entry process across Western Australia. So 5 different universities all doing it differently. So the intent was there that we were taking the pressure off students in those final year exams when they were missing out on chunks of their learning, and allowing them to use their previous year's results in order to get that early entry. However, because we were all doing things differently, it was confusing for students. They weren't sure, you know, which way they had to do it for one university compared to the next. So if we'd had those earlier conversations and not been as competitive to think, oh, well, this is a way that we can help with our recruitment, it would have actually been a much better outcome for the Western Australia sector. If I now can just think about talking about partnering a bit more, and with partnering, I think about going a bit wider. So I think one of the things that we've learned about through this is that, you know, technology, it was there. We've accelerated. Ben, I loved all the things you were saying about where we are now. We've taken that 15 years and made it happen in 10 days, 3 days in some instances. But what it's made us realise is we don't have to function in the same way in a university anymore. And we've been talking about having this co-design, co-delivery, cooperative learning, where we're actually working very closely with organisations to help the students have that real world learning. And because we know we can now do those kind of things in a much more using the technology as the norm, then it's kind of accelerating this. And, you know, thinking about something that I call beaming in excellence, you know, we don't have to have the person being able to come and do a guest lecture anymore and be in the classroom. It can be anybody, anywhere in the world that we can say, actually, we really think that what you've got to offer is really valuable to our students, and will you be part of that experience for them? And really look at that partnership, you know, very much globally and build on that. But I think even further than that is that I think people have realised that where they get their education can be across the whole of, you know, the global offerings. They don't have to necessarily be, if they're going to be doing more online experiences, they don't have to be just within a one institution. They can find where they can find the things that suit them and get that kind of tailored learning experience. And it may not even always be at a university level. So I know a lot of people use these kind of examples, but if we think about the kind of Ubers, the Airbnbs, you know, Uber, the taxi firm with no taxis, Airbnb, the hotels without no hotels. Well, if we think differently about universities as a Uberversity, then maybe where we need to be thinking, in addition to our more traditional way of delivering the learning experience and then assessing in order to be able to award, maybe we can get more comfortable with saying it doesn't matter where the learning experience comes from. It doesn't have to come from us. We're comfortable that we can let that go. And what we do as a university is see whether or not the learning experiences that the people who come to us have are at the right level in order to be able to award them the appropriate degree. So we become more of that assessment, that kind of capstone of people bringing what they've got from different areas to the universities to say, yes, we can recognise that for you, and it's okay that you've been able to have a global learning experience in that way. The last thing I would say is just to, in relation to how can we partner and help with those universities that are perhaps more advanced, more senior, been around longer, with those ones that are perhaps younger. And I mean, to me, that's a simple answer. It's networks. We've got some great networks that really support us in Australia. We work across Australia with the Universities Australia. We have groups that work to support different roles, academic, vice-chancellor, research, international. And then we also have smaller networks in that kind of give more like-minded, similar universities an opportunity to work together. So my university is part of the Innovative Research Universities, but we also have a regional universities network, a technology network. We have one that's we call the GO8, which are, you know, the equivalent of the Russell Group in the UK. So those kind of groupings that can work together on these solutions and kind of, you know, have that joined up voice to really help progress things. And I think that's really useful. And then also the conversations that go on within each of our individual states to actually have that collaboration moving forward. So partnering, collaboration, I think it's where we have to be and where we have to have that conversation.
Thank you, Professor Romy, for highlighting certain best practices in collaborations. And I like the idea of some universities getting together and forming a collective and engaging the professional councils to find some solutions to the student needs, student issues, and it will go a long way in making the life easier for students. And my next question is directed to Mr. Phil Baty. How can a culture of internal quality assurance be created within academia to promote excellence and benchmark good practices in the areas of teaching and learning, research and administration? Over to you, Mr. Phil.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and I would absolutely echo Romy's comments that I think we're moving to an era of sharing and collaboration. I think it's vitally important, and although rankings often position universities in terms of competition, I think more and more they can be opened up and the data can be deployed to actually encourage and incite collaboration, I hope. In terms of Times Higher Education's role, actually we felt we've hit our 50th anniversary this year. That's 50 years of providing way more than just data and rankings. We provide content and we provide events. We see ourselves as a facilitator, a supporter of excellence in global higher education. I've personally just hit my 25th year at Times Higher Education as well, most of my career there. So we've had a really big think over the last 18 months about what we can do better to support the community, to support the higher education sector. And obviously the crisis has prompted lots of people to innovate and to try new things. And a major initiative that Times Higher Education launched last year, early on in the pandemic, was THE Campus. And this is basically a platform that we've created entirely free. It's a completely open peer-to-peer network where people share best practice. We got some seed funding from Microsoft. We got seed funding from Arizona State University and an organization called Sintana to build a new community platform for academics. And the entire purpose there is to share best practice. It's very much about resources. In the early days, of course, it was all about how do we adjust to online learning? How do we ensure we engage our students? How do we maintain standards? How do we reform the way we assess and monitor performance? How do we rethink education? How do we even tackle the digital divide, cope with engagement challenges? But it's become a really rapidly growing place where individual scholars across the world are uploading their own resources, their short videos of explanation, course content, essays in some cases. And it's become a wonderful global community to share good practice. And I think what we're seeing now is individual universities are subscribing as content providers. So we have the University of Edinburgh, the University of Exeter, the University of East Anglia in the UK have become Campus Plus members. They are basically institutional content providers. We have Arizona State, we have University Boulder, Colorado. Many universities are joining this movement. And what is exciting to us is it's just a platform, it's just a space where people can actually share best practice. And it's a community space, so you can become an individual content provider. Your materials get reviewed and shared. And so we've got this amazing opportunity to spread excellence through this completely free platform, reward individuals for great innovation and great teaching and great quality, reward the institutions for actually actively sharing and collaborating rather than being competitive. So that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. I think we've contributed, and I'm incredibly proud and excited by it, but it needs to be fueled by the community. We just sit back and let the community build this incredible resource. So less on the quality assurance, internal culture, but more on this concept that we need to just be much more open, much more collaborative in helping one another and sharing great ideas and great examples of good practice.
Thank you, Mr. Phil Baty. It's very interesting to hear about the Times Higher Education campus platform launched by you and how it is helping various academics. And congratulations to you at a personal level for completing 25 years in Times Higher Education. And congratulations to THE on the 50th anniversary. My next question is directed to Mr. Ben Sowter from QS. How can universities engage more meaningfully with external quality assurance agencies to achieve higher levels of excellence? Over to Mr. Ben.
Thank you. and I'm going to resist the urge to answer your question with an explanation of what QS has been doing lately. There are three principles, three B's, I would say I would answer that question with. Be unafraid, be consistent, and be yourself. So be unafraid. What do I mean by that? I mean, universities are scared of the results before they even contribute their information. That happens quite a lot. We reach out to new universities and they want to know what their answer is going to be before they give us the data that we're going to need to use to calculate what the answer is going to be. Data provides you an opportunity for insight. Insight provides you an opportunity for informed decision-making. Informed decision-making provides you with an opportunity to do more for your community, more for your students, more for the future of your institution. So I think the first thing is, I would advise institutions to engage as broadly as possible with as many different quality assurance and rankings agencies as they can in order to build the most complete data picture they can from external sources of valid third-party audited data that gives you a sense of where you are right now in the dimensions that those things measure. So that's the first thing, be unafraid. The second thing is to be consistent. This is another behavior that we frequently get from universities. If a university does stratospherically well, comes 150 places higher in a particular exercise than it does in any other by any provider, their instinct typically is to say, look at us, this is our position in the world, aren't we fantastic? And they don't ask the question, they don't illustrate any inquisitiveness, they don't explore the veracity of that outcome. And if it turns out later that that has been as a result of an error, well, they look a little bit silly, frankly, because they haven't applied the same degree of academic rigor on that positive outcome as they would do if they came 150 places lower than they expected. So we get institutions placing a great deal more scrutiny on a disappointing result than on an unexpected positive result. And I would caution institutions to be consistent in both cases. If you go up in a ranking, talk about it. But if you go down in a ranking, don't disengage from that rankings organization. Try to find out what's going on. Try to be inquisitive. We have had circumstances where a university will treat our team with great disdain when they have gone down, and with the whole VIP red carpet treatment when they've gone up. Both of those are suboptimal. I would recommend that you just treat us the same in all cases, and openly and explore and engage and speak to us and separate yourself from the outcome. Whether or not it's good or whether or not it's bad, it's not personal. Hopefully it's informative. And we go by the mantra that essentially all models are wrong, but some are useful. So even when you get a disappointing result, take from it what is useful, deploy it in a way that makes sense for you, and take it forward. So be consistent. The third is to be yourself. Don't lose yourself in your priorities to the things that the rankings measure or the things that the quality assurance agency measure. As I spoke about earlier, most universities should be aspiring not to comply, but to delight, to go so far beyond the baseline measures of any external compliance that it's almost not relevant anymore. And some of the things that Professor Yu and Professor Lawson were talking about are indications of those things. You're concerned about the student experience, not because there's a quality assurance agency breathing down your neck, looking exactly what you're doing with the experience of your students. You're concerned about the experience your students are going through because that is why you exist. That's one of your fundamental reasons for being. So you look at that in a far more sophisticated way than any external quality assurance agency or rankings compiler could possibly do. So don't be tempted to place too much focus on the things that the rankings and quality assurance organizations measure, and lose sight of the things that are central to your mission and your identity as a university. So to engage more meaningfully with external agencies of all kinds, be unafraid, be consistent, and be yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Ben. It has been a wonderful exposition. We missed Professor Dr. Kripa Shanker while he was addressing the first question. Is Dr. Kripa Shanker there? I'm afraid he's not there. Now we move on to the Q&A session. There have been a number of interesting questions, nearly about more than 10 questions which have cropped up, but we have a very limited time, and maybe I'll take just one question from Natalia Pujari. The question goes like this: how can institutions ensure holistic development of individuals and good quality of education in the ongoing online mode? How can accreditation and rankings processes contribute to this? Anyone wants to go? It's open to the entire panel.
Sorry, could you reread the question for a moment?
Oh, I can reread the question. How can institutions ensure holistic development of individuals and good quality of education in the ongoing online mode? How can accreditation and rankings processes contribute to this?
I guess that sort of feeds off my answer to the first question, where I was pointing out that for many people at university, the real takeaways are not necessarily what's on the curriculum, but all of the things that happen surrounding that as part of the student experience. And I do think it's really important for universities to think a little bit more tactically around how they can deliver that to prospective online students, not just in a pandemic scenario, but online students that might be in a different part of the world in future times, as online education becomes more normal and more acceptable and more recognized by employers and these kind of things. How does a university experience fill in the gaps for somebody that's not able to play football with their peers, on the campus football pitch? One of the things that we've been looking at a little bit is how we can attribute skills that employers consider important to experiences that people have gone through earlier in their lives, usually outside the classroom. So, for instance, if people are looking for intercultural communication skills, do they look to universities that have got a lot of exchange programs and a lot of international students and a lot of international programs? If people are looking for team skills, do they look for people who've had a lot of opportunity and exposure to engage and participate in sport and other team activities, for example? And so there's an interesting question there. If you're educating somebody on the other side of the world on an online program, how do you tell them what the other things are that they need to do in order to round out their education? Because every city in the world has got a football team you can join. It's not just about you being able to play in the university football team. So maybe there's a way for universities to do a better job of speaking to online students around what the extracurricular things that if they were on campus they would be doing, and perhaps signpost opportunities in their local environment to engage with that, point out where the local football clubs are, point out where the local museums are, point out how you can go and get involved in Toastmasters or other kind of activities that can fill in some of those extracurricular gaps and complete and perhaps round out a more university-like experience, despite the fact that your classes are actually online. As to what external rankings and quality assurance agencies can do about this, well, one of the biggest things we can do, and actually in Phil's last answer he was talking about this, and it's something that we do in a variety of different ways as well, is showcase some of the things that can't be ranked. Tell stories, shine a spotlight on good practice and best practice, point out where the leadership lies in the sector, because generally the metrics are going to get you to a certain level. But for the leadership, you've got to go so far beyond that, and you've got to really understand where the success stories are really happening and connect people together to collaborate and share that good practice and see how it can be implemented in other places. And QS, like Times Higher Education, we've got a Reimagine Education Awards program. We've got various other things that are designed to try and point out where you can find examples of stories that can never be put into the metrics.
Thank you. There are so many interesting questions, but owing to paucity of time, we are unable to take them. Can we have one brief 1 minute last comment from the panelists, starting from Mr. Phil Baty?
Yes, of course. Look, there's a cliched line that I've been repeating a lot through this this pandemic, which is that, you know, this idea that universities can change the course of history through their discoveries, through their innovations, but they can't change a history course because they're burdened by red tape and bureaucracy and endless committee structures. That myth has been busted. Universities have proven they can do extraordinary things very quickly. They can make great innovative change overnight. The most important thing is, of all the terrible, terrible things that have happened through this pandemic and are still happening, we need to seize those really positive, seize the momentum, seize the dynamism, seize the agility, and make sure we do build back better, to use another cliche. We should have not a recovery, an equicovery, as they say. I had Anna Murray course at the University of Washington saying it needs to be an equicovery, not a recovery. And the most important thing for me, just really briefly, is universities have and must rediscover their social purpose, rediscover their obligations to society, rediscover their role as a fantastic, vital public good. And I think that, for me, is the most fundamental thing that should come out of this. Thanks.
Thank you. Professor, you, 1 minute last comment.
Thank you. Now, we talk about the quality assurance and all that, and you know that under whatever kind of conditions and situation, it has to come from the inner part of it. Because it is very important that the organization, institution itself, think highly about this and they think that this is something very important. So all the external benchmarking, accreditations and all that will definitely help us to grow. But as mentioned by all our panelists here, it is very important that from internal part, how we continue to have this aim. And more important is actually, as mentioned by Phil just now, we have to be relevant to the society, to the world, so that we can continue to actually play our role as a university to contribute to the world. That's why it's very important that during this time, we have to actually help a student to grow from the formal curriculum, core curriculum, or hidden curriculum, about how they can be actually having this growth mindset and empathy. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Romy, one last brief comment from you.
Sure. I think there was no blueprint, was there, for what's just happened, and we've had to, you know, live through it and learn through it. And I think as leaders, I think there's been a real lesson there that, you know, we have to stay nimble and we have to accept that when we do things that haven't been the best solutions, that we learn from them and we change, and we just say, okay, there wasn't a blueprint, we've had to change the approach, and it wasn't right in the first place. But I think the main thing that I've experienced, and I know a lot of our conversation today has been about the online and the online learning, that hasn't been what has carried us through the last 18 months. At the heart of what's actually helped universities be successful is the people. This would not have happened because of, you know, we would not have been successful because of the technology. It's been because of the people, the staff and the students. And it's been their willingness to both adapt and to accept what was going on. And that's what's carried the universities through over the last 18 months. And for that, I'm very grateful to all those people who work in the university sector.
Thank you. I want to profusely thank all the panelists for enriching this session with their views and insights and perspectives. Thanks a lot. With this, the session has ended, and it's been a pleasure interacting with you and moderating this panel. Thank you.